The great conclave of Xylos Prime was a chamber of living crystal, a vast, cathedral-like space where the very walls hummed with the slow, ancient life of the world mind. Light, filtered through a translucent ceiling of interwoven crystalline flora, fell in soft, iridescent columns, illuminating the Grand Council. At the center of the circular chamber, a dais of polished obsidian held the High Counselor, Thrax, his multifaceted form radiating a calm that felt brittle, a placid surface over a deep and troubled sea. His chimes, the crystalline filaments that fringed his body, remained perfectly still, a feat of immense control. All around him, the other counselors shifted, their own chimes rustling with agitation, creating a dissonant whisper that filled the immense silence between pronouncements. The topic of their debate, the singular obsession of the Xylos collective for cycles, hung in the air like a shroud: humanity. A holographic projection shimmered above the dais, a swirling, chaotic map of the galactic arm where the human sphere of influence, a messy, aggressive stain, was beginning to encroach upon the serene, ordered territory of the collective. Specifically, it touched the edge of the Veil of Whispers, a nebula rich in exotic matter that the Xylos had claimed by ancient decree, a claim that had stood unchallenged for millennia. Until now. Their expansion is an affront to cosmic order, declared Counselor Kalen, his form a sharp, angular construct of dark, volcanic glass. His chimes vibrated with a percussive martial rhythm. They are primitives who have stumbled upon the secret of faster-than-light travel. They boil across the stars like a pestilence, their movements dictated by no discernible logic, no grand design. They are loud, broadcasting chaotic signals of art and war, mathematics and raw, unfiltered emotion. They are a fever in the galactic bloodstream. Thrax listened, his ancient mind processing the familiar argument. Kalen, head of the defense conquered, saw only a nail that needed to be hammered down. He advocated for a demonstration of overwhelming force, a cleansing of the human outposts in the Veil, a stern and final lesson in galactic hierarchy. It was a simple, direct solution, and that was precisely what worried Thrax. Nothing about the humans was simple. And yet, a softer voice chimed in, belonging to Lyra, a philosopher whose crystalline form was a swirl of pale, opalescent hues. Her chimes produced a sound like wind through hollow reeds. Their mathematics are elegant, their art possesses a profound, if unsettling, depth. They mourn their dead with a sorrow that resonates across the void. They build with a frantic desperation, as if pursued by some unseen terror. To dismiss them as mere primitives is to blind ourselves to a more complex truth. Complexity is not an excuse for transgression, Kalen countered, his form darkening. They have violated our sovereign space. They have ignored our formal communiques, responding only with terse, indecipherable statements about security imperatives and buffer zones. What security could a species of their nascent power possibly require from the Xylos collective? We have maintained peace in this quadrant for 10,000 of their frantic, short years. Their paranoia is an insult. Thrax let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of their conflicting views to settle in the chamber. He gazed at the holographic map, at the angry red smear of human expansion. Kalen was right in his facts. The humans were aggressive, unpredictable, and their technology, while effective, lacked the grace and harmony of Xylos' design. Their ships were brutalist wedges of metal and radiation, engines roaring with brute force rather than humming with elegant gravimetric displacement. They were a species of jarring contradictions. They composed symphonies that could make a Xylos' core resonate with a strange, aching beauty, and then broadcast holovids of planetary bombardments from their own internal conflicts, displaying a capacity for self-destruction that was utterly alien to the consensus-driven, harmonious existence of the collective. His own analysts were baffled. Human psychology was a chaotic storm. They were capable of breathtaking altruism and stomach-churning cruelty, often within the same individual. They built societies on principles of individual freedom that seemed, to the collective mind of the Xylos, like a blueprint for pure anarchy. And yet they not only survived, they thrived. They spread, they consumed, they built, always with that same frantic, desperate energy, as if they were running out of time. They are not a rational actor, Kalen pressed, sensing the council's indecision. We cannot negotiate with a storm, we cannot reason with a plague, we must act to preserve the sanctity of our borders, to maintain the stability we have so carefully cultivated. A surgical strike, a show of force. They will learn their place or they why. LLB returned to the cosmic dust from which they spawned. The thought sent a shiver through Thrax's core. It was not a fear of human military might. The collective's fleets were vast, their technology the product of eons of refinement. A conflict would be, by all logical metrics, a swift and decisive victory for the Xylos. No, his unease stemmed from something deeper. He had reviewed the human historical archives they had managed to intercept, a fraction of their story, but enough to paint a disturbing picture. He had witnessed their wars. He had seen them turn their own world into a radioactive wasteland and then impossibly rebuild it. He had seen them fight each other with a ferocity, a totality, that the Xylos had not even conceived of since their own primordial genesis. They did not merely defeat their enemies. They annihilated them, they ground them into memory and myth, and they did so with a chilling efficiency born of relentless practice. They were a species that had perfected the art of war upon itself. What would happen, he wondered, if that perfected, practiced violence were ever turned outward, focused on a true external foe? The thought was like a crack forming in the ancient crystal of his certainty. The collective had not faced a true peer in 100 millennia. They had forgotten the taste of existential fear. He suspected the humans tasted it every day of their short, brutal lives. A single vessel has just translated from hyperspace at the edge of our system. A new voice, the calm, synthesized tone of the Conclave's master AI, echoed through the chamber. It is of human design, small, a courier class barely armed. It is broadcasting a standard diplomatic request to approach Xylos Prime. They are hailing us. A wave of murmurs swept through the counselors. Kalen's form pulsed with a dark light. A trick, a Trojan horse, or a gesture of surrender, destroy it. No, Thrax commanded, his voice resonating with an authority that silenced the chamber. The chimes on his body rang with a clear, final note. He turned his focus inward, communing with the AI. Grant them a safe corridor. Guide them to the orbital diplomatic station. I will meet them myself. High Counselor, Kalen protested, this is an unacceptable risk, to treat these trespassers as legitimate dignitaries. It is a greater risk to proceed from a position of ignorance, Thrax countered, his gaze sweeping across the assembled counselors. We have debated their nature for cycles, analyzing them from afar like curious specimens. Now the specimen has knocked on our door. It would be illogical not to answer. He looked back at the holographic map, at the tiny, blinking icon of the lone human ship against the vast, serene blue of Xylos territory. We will hear what they have to say. And we will learn if our fear of their nature is justified, or if we are merely afraid of that which we do not understand. The chamber fell silent, the weight of his decision settling like fine dust on an ancient tomb. The humans were coming, and Thrax felt a profound, chilling certainty that the long, quiet peace of the galaxy was about to end. The diplomatic station was a marvel of Xylos engineering, a spire of woven light and solid energy suspended in high orbit, designed to awe and pacify any visitor. Yet, as Ambassador Eva Rostova stepped from the docking umbilical, her presence seemed to absorb the grandeur of the space, leaving it feeling strangely diminished. She was, by Xylos standards, a creature of profound fragility. Soft tissues, a simple bilateral symmetry, a form unprotected by any natural armor. Her movements were fluid, efficient, but Thrax, observing from the far end of the reception chamber, saw the tension coiled in her posture, the ceaseless, minute calculations in her dark, focused eyes. She was a predator, he realized, not in the overt, aggressive way of Kalen, but in a quiet, watchful manner that was far more unsettling. Her mind was constantly assessing, analyzing, preparing. She was escorted by two silent Xylos attendants, their crystalline forms gliding smoothly over the illuminated floor. She wore a simple, dark uniform of a functional, severe cut, adorned with no rank, no medals, no indication of her status other than the profound and unnerving stillness she carried with her. Thrax moved to greet her, his own form a towering monument of ancient crystal next to her compact, organic frame. Ambassador Rostova, Thrax intoned, his voice a series of harmonized chords that was translated into her language by the ambient field. On behalf of the Xylos Collective, I welcome you to our home system. It is a bold gesture to come here alone. High Counselor Thrax, she replied, her voice calm, devoid of any discernible emotion. It was not cold, but rather perfectly controlled. Boldness is a matter of perspective. From ours, it was a logical necessity. Our communiques have gone unanswered. Our presence in the Il Nebula has been met with ultimatums. Dialogue is the only remaining path to avoid misunderstanding. The word hung in the air between them, misunderstanding. It was a diplomatic term for a prelude to war. They stood in the center of the vast chamber, a silent tableau of two utterly alien philosophies meeting for the first time. The light from Xylo's prime star streamed through the transparent dome above, casting long, stark shadows. "There is no misunderstanding," Kalen's sharp voice cut in. He had joined Thrax, his form a stark, threatening silhouette against the gentle light. "You have encroached upon sovereign Xylo's territory, a territory held in stewardship for longer than your species has possessed coherent thought. That is not a misunderstanding. It is an act of aggression." Rostova's gaze shifted to Kalen. Her eyes, Thrax noted, did not widen in fear or narrow in anger. They simply observed. They took his measure, catalogued his threat potential, and dismissed him as a known quantity. It was a look of profound, almost weary experience. "Aggression was not our intent," she stated, her voice losing none of its measured calm. "Our expansion into the Veil is a matter of strategic necessity. We require the resources within it, and we require the spatial buffer it provides for the security of our core worlds." "Security?" Kalen's chimes rattled with incredulous fury. "Security from whom? From the collective. We have not waged a war of conquest in 50,000 years. Your paranoia is baseless. It is the justification of a thief attempting to dignify their crime." Rostova turned her full attention back to Thrax, as if acknowledging that he was the only true authority in the room. "High Counselor, our motivations are not born of paranoia, but of history, of experience. We do not expect you to understand it, as your history and ours are fundamentally different, but we ask that you respect its consequences." Thrax felt the conversation slipping toward the precipice Kalen desired. He needed to pull it back, to delve deeper into the enigma she presented. "Your history is known to us, Ambassador. We have observed your broadcasts. We have seen the records of your internal conflicts. It is a history of violence, of chaos. It is this very history that gives us pause. A species so quick to wage war upon itself seems a poor neighbor for those who value peace." For the first time, a flicker of something new crossed the ambassador's face. It was not anger or shame. It was a deep, profound sadness. It was the look of a scholar forced to explain a painful, self-evident truth to a child. "You have seen the data, High Counselor, but you have not understood it. You see our past as a reason to distrust us. We see it as the very foundation of our right to exist. You call it chaos. We call it the crucible that forged us." Her words were cryptic, yet they resonated with a strange, terrible weight. Thrax felt the conversation shifting onto a philosophical plane he had not anticipated. He gestured towards a seating area, a collection of smooth, crystalline platforms that adapted to the physiology of their occupant. "Explain," he said, his voice softer now, more inquisitive. Kalen remained standing, a rigid sentinel of disapproval. Rostova took a seat, her posture remaining formal, upright. "The Xylos collective is ancient. You have achieved a state of equilibrium, of perfect harmony. Your society is a single, magnificent crystal. It is beautiful, it is strong, but it is brittle. It has not been struck with true force for an eternity. Humanity is not a crystal. We are forged metal. We were born in fire, hammered on the anvil of our own worst instincts, and plunged into the cold waters of near extinction, time and time again. Each time we emerged harder, stronger, more resilient. Our chaos, our violence, our endless internal strife, it was not a flaw in our design. It was the design process itself." Thrax felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. He was beginning to see the terrifying shape of the truth she was unveiling. "You are saying your capacity for violence is a strength." "No," Rostova corrected gently. "Our capacity for violence is a terrible burden. Our will to survive that violence is our strength. You see us expanding into the veil and assume it is for conquest. You assume we desire what is yours. It is a profound misreading of our nature. We are not seeking to conquer the galaxy. We are seeking to build a wall against the darkness, a wall high enough that we can never, ever be cornered again. Because our history has taught us one lesson above all others: what happens when humanity is cornered." Kalen scoffed, an abrasive clattering of his chimes. "Empty rhetoric. You speak of this will as if it were some mystical force. Power is measured in fleets, in weapons, in strategic dominance. By those metrics, you are insignificant." Rostova's gaze met Kalen's, and for a fleeting moment, the calm control in her eyes was replaced by something else, something ancient and cold and absolute. It was a look that promised utter annihilation, delivered with no malice, no anger, but with the simple, inexorable certainty of a physical law. "You are mistaken, Counselor. The most powerful weapon in the universe is not a ship or a bomb. It is the will to fight when all hope is lost. It is the will to sacrifice everything for the slimmest chance of survival. It is the will to look into the abyss and fight the abyss itself. Your people have not had to cultivate that will for 100,000 years. My people cultivate it every single day." The silence that followed was absolute. Thrax felt the truth of her words resonate in the very core of his being. The Xylos had forgotten how to truly fight. They knew the mechanics of war, the logistics of fleets, the physics of advanced weaponry. But they had forgotten the primal, desperate fury of a species fighting for its very soul. Humanity had never been allowed to forget. "You believe we would be an easy conquest," Rostova continued, her voice once again a placid stream. "A quick, surgical strike to put the primitives in their place. You are calculating the number of your ships against ours, the energy output of your weapons against ours. You are running a simulation based on logic, but you cannot simulate our response because it is not entirely logical. It is primal. If you attack our outposts in the Veil, we will not retreat. We will not surrender. We will fight you. You will destroy those outposts, of course, but the act of doing so will trigger a response protocol in our entire civilization. Your surgical strike will be interpreted by us as an existential threat. And when humanity perceives an existential threat, we do not calculate the odds of victory. We calculate the cost of our enemy's victory, and we make that cost so high that it becomes indistinguishable from defeat." She paused, letting the terrifying implication of her statement settle. "We will turn every ship into a tomb, every planet into a fortress, every single one of our citizens into a soldier. We will bleed you across 1,000 star systems. We will learn your technology, your strategies, your weaknesses, and we will turn them against you. We will invent horrors you cannot imagine, because we have already imagined them and used them on ourselves. You may, after centuries of bloodshed that will shatter your peaceful society, eventually defeat us. You may scour the last human from the last burning world. But the galaxy you inherit will be a graveyard, and the Xylos Collective will be its broken warden. That is the price of a war with humanity. I am here today, High Counselor, to ask you in all sincerity if the Veil of Whispers is worth that price." Thrax was silent. He looked at Kaelin, whose rigid form now seemed less like a symbol of strength and more like one of brittle arrogance. The Defense Conquered had run countless simulations. All of them predicted a Xylos victory within a few cycles. But they were all based on the assumption that the humans would fight rationally, that they would surrender when faced with overwhelming odds, that they would seek to preserve their civilization. Rostova had just explained with chilling clarity that this fundamental assumption was wrong. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting not to lose, and the distinction was terrifying. "You speak of a truth we cannot see," Thrax said finally, his voice a low hum of troubled thought. "Words are easy, Ambassador. The threat of mutual annihilation is the oldest gambit in diplomacy. We require more than a warning. We require understanding." Rostova nodded slowly, as if she had expected this. She reached into her simple uniform and produced a small, silver data crystal. It looked like a primitive, almost laughable piece of technology compared to the integrated data networks of the Xylos. "I did not come here only with words, High Counselor. I have been authorized to give you a gift, a key to understanding us. This is not a technical schematic. It is not a military assessment. It is a historical archive, a specific one. It is called the Lest We Forget Archive. It is a record our own people are required to study. It is the source of our strength and our greatest shame." She placed the crystal on the platform beside her. It seemed impossibly small and insignificant in the vast, grand chamber. Yet Thrax felt as if it were a singularity, a point of infinite density that was warping the very fabric of the conversation, of their shared future. "Study it," Rostova said, her voice now carrying a note of profound gravity. "See the crucible, see the fire and the hammer and the anvil, see what we have done to ourselves, and then you will understand what we are willing to do to survive. After you have viewed it, I will await your decision." With that, she stood, gave a slight, formal bow, and waited to be asked. Ordered away, Kaelin did not move, his form frozen in a state of conflicted shock. Thrax watched her leave, the fragile, organic creature who carried the weight of a species forged in hell. He looked down at the small, silver crystal, a gift, she had called it. He had a terrible feeling it was a curse. The Grand Conclave was reconvened, but the atmosphere had changed. The agitated whispers of the counselors had been replaced by a heavy, profound silence. In the center of the chamber, the holographic display was no longer showing star charts. It was showing the contents of the human's data crystal. Thrax had insisted the entire council bear witness. He would not allow them the comfort of a summarized report. They had to see. They had to feel the weight of it. The archive was not a curated history of humanity's triumphs. It was a raw, unfiltered catalog of their deepest horrors, a memorial to their own monstrous potential. The images flickered through the air, rendered in stark, brutal detail by the Xylos' holographic technology. They saw cities turned to glass by atomic fire, their skylines dissolving into mushroom clouds. They saw trenches carved into a continent, filled with mud and poison gas and the bodies of millions of young men, fighting and dying over inches of blasted earth. They saw systematic, industrialized extermination, beings herded into camps and erased from existence for no reason other than their creed or their bloodline. The Xylos, a species that had not known murder in millennia, watched with a silent, growing sickness. The archive was relentless. It showed worlds choking on their own industrial waste, oceans turning black, skies turning brown. It showed civil wars fought with biological plagues that rewrote the very essence of their victims before killing them. It showed famine, fanaticism, and betrayals on a scale so vast and intimate that the Xylos' mind, accustomed to the harmony of a collective consciousness, could barely process it. This was not the history of a civilization. It was the history of a self-inflicted apocalypse, repeated over and over in 1,000 different ways. Kalen's martial certainty had evaporated. His dark, crystalline form seemed to have shrunk, the sharp angles rounded by a heavy, invisible weight. Lyra's opalescent form was clouded, her soft chimes utterly still. She was weeping in her own way, a slow secretion of luminous fluid tracing patterns down her sides. Thrax felt his own ancient core trembling. He had seen violence in the galaxy before, the mindless predation of non-sentient creatures, the occasional territorial skirmish between younger races. But he had never seen this. This was not violence for territory or resources. This was violence as an expression of an idea, as a tool of ideology, as an act of pure, nihilistic rage against existence itself. It was intimate and industrial, passionate and cold, all at once. The final entry in the archive was not an image of war, but a quiet, somber ceremony. It showed a gathering of human leaders from every nation and faction, standing before a simple black monolith. The date stamp indicated it was from only a few centuries prior, just before their first true push into the stars. A human woman, the same Ambassador Rostova, though younger, stood before the monolith and spoke. Her voice, filled with a quiet, resolute sorrow, echoed through the conclave. "We stand here not to celebrate a victory, but to acknowledge a truth," her recorded voice said, a stark contrast to her controlled calm on the station. "The greatest enemy of humanity has never been a predator from the stars or a cataclysm of nature. It has always been and will always be ourselves. Our capacity for hatred, for division, for self-destruction is a flaw coded into our very being. For millennia, we have turned this flaw upon each other, and we have nearly extinguished the flame of our consciousness a dozen times over. Today, we make a new vow. We will not be consumed by this darkness. We will harness it. We will acknowledge it. We will remember it every day. This monument is not for the dead. It is for the living. It is a reminder of the price of failure. It is a warning that the beast is not slain. It is merely caged. And as we turn our faces to the stars, we take this knowledge with us. We will seek peace, but we will be prepared for war. We will extend our hand in friendship, but our other hand will forever rest upon the hilt of a sword. Not because we are eager for a fight, but because we know better than any species in this universe the cost of being unprepared. We have paid that price in our own blood too many times. Never again, lest we forget." The recording ended. The holographic display faded, leaving only the soft, ambient light of the conclave. The silence was absolute. It was a silence born not of peace, but of shared, horrified understanding. Thrax finally broke the stillness. His voice was a low, resonant chord of pure sorrow. "We saw them as primitives, as illogical, chaotic barbarians. We were wrong. They are not pre-civilized. They are post-apocalyptic." He let that sink in. The frantic expansion, the blunt diplomacy, the brutalist ship design, the unsettling paranoia, it all snapped into focus. It was not the behavior of an arrogant young species drunk on new power. It was the behavior of a traumatized survivor, desperately barricading the doors and windows of their new home, terrified that the horrors of the past would return. Their enemy was not the Xylos. Their enemy was the memory of themselves. "Their will to fight," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "It is not born of a desire for conquest. It is a species-wide immune response honed by millennia of self-inflicted disease. They fight with such totality because they have seen what happens when you do not. They have stared into the abyss of their own nature and survived. We have no concept of such a thing." Kalen finally moved. He turned his form toward Thrax, and for the first time in his long life, the head of the defense conquered looked not defiant, but afraid. "High Counselor," he began, his voice stripped of its usual percussive force, "the simulations, they are worthless. They are predicated on a foe who values life, who seeks to minimize loss, who will surrender to preserve their culture. Rostova, she was not threatening us. She was giving us a statement of fact. He paused, the chimes on his body making a soft, discordant sound, a sound of pure dread. If we engage this species in a war, they will not stop until we are utterly broken or they are utterly extinct. There is no other outcome for them. It is the only way they know how to survive. Thrax looked around the chamber at the faces of his fellow counselors. He saw his own dawning horror reflected in every multifaceted eye. They had been debating whether to swat a fly, and had just been informed that the fly was, in fact, the harbinger of a supernova. Humanity's strength was not in its ships or its weapons. It was in its will. A will forged in the fires of hell, a will so absolute, so uncompromising that it bordered on a law of nature. They were the galaxy's ultimate survivors, and the Xylos had been about to provide them with the one thing they had been unconsciously seeking for their entire existence. A true, external, existential threat to unify them and focus their terrible, self-destructive energies outward. The result would be a storm that would scour the galaxy clean. The Veil of Whispers is no longer the issue, Thrax declared, his voice ringing with newfound clarity and purpose. The petty border dispute seemed like a child's squabble in the face of this revelation. The issue is how we engage with a species whose very existence is a paradox of creation and destruction. We cannot threaten them, we cannot intimidate them, and we cannot ignore them. He looked toward the shimmering starfield visible through the dome. Ambassador Rostova was waiting on the station, a calm, patient messenger of a terrifying truth. He knew what he had to do. The risk of war was too great, the potential consequences beyond calculation. But the risk of leaving such a species to fend for itself, to continue seeing shadows in every corner, might be just as great. Their paranoia, born of their own past, could easily lead them to strike first at some perceived threat in the future. We will not offer them a truce, Thrax said, his decision solidifying like cooling magma. A truce implies a temporary cessation of hostilities. There are no hostilities. There is only our ignorance and their pain. We will offer them an alliance. The word sent a ripple of shock through the conclave, even in its subdued state. An alliance with these terrifying, broken creatures. They are desperately seeking security, Thrax explained, his logic flowing clearly now that the foundational misunderstanding had been corrected. They are building walls. What if we were to offer them not a wall, but a watchtower? What if we, the most stable, ancient power in this quadrant, were to extend our hand and guarantee their security? What if we were to share our knowledge, our technology, our philosophy of harmony, and in return we were to learn from them, learn their resilience, their tenacity? Their will, he shuddered as he said the word. Their paranoia, which we saw as a flaw, may be a tool we have forgotten we need. In our long peace we have become complacent. They are never complacent. They see threats everywhere. Perhaps it is time we started looking with their eyes. He knew it was a radical proposal. It went against 10,000 years of Xylo's policy. But humanity was a radical variable. They required a radical solution. He would meet with the ambassador again. He would offer her not a treaty over a nebula, but a pact of mutual understanding and defense. He would offer to help them cage the beast of their past, not by fighting it, but by showing them that the universe did not have to be the relentless enemy they had been conditioned to expect. He hoped he was right. He hoped that their will to survive could be guided toward a will to build, to coexist. Because the alternative, a galaxy consumed by the fires of humanity's trauma, was a future too terrible to contemplate. The second meeting with Ambassador Rostova took place not in the grand, intimidating reception hall, but in a smaller, more private chamber, one designed for quiet contemplation. The walls were panels of quiescent crystal that emitted a soft, calming light, and the only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of the station's life support. Thrax had dismissed Kalen and the others. This had to be a conversation, not a negotiation. Rostova entered, her expression as unreadable as before, but Thrax could now see the immense weight behind her composure. He was no longer looking at a fragile organic, but at the living embodiment of a scar, a representative of a species that had walked through fire and carried the embers in its soul. Ambassador, Thrax began, his tone formal but imbued with a new, profound respect. The Grand Council has reviewed the archive you provided. We understand. The simple statement was a massive understatement. The truth was that the Xylos were reeling, their entire perception of galactic society fundamentally and irrevocably altered. They were like beings who had lived their entire lives in a serene garden, only to discover it was perched on the lip of an active volcano. Rostova simply nodded, her gaze unwavering. She was waiting. She knew her gift was a shock. She was waiting to see if the Xylos would recoil in fear or lean forward in understanding. Your assessment of our likely response to a military conflict was sobering, Thrax continued. But it is the reason for that response that has prompted this new dialogue. Your history, the crucible as you called it, we have no frame of reference for such a past. Our own evolution was one of gradual harmony, of a slow merging into a collective consciousness. We have never had to fear ourselves. It is a fear I would not wish upon any other sentient being, Rostova said, her voice quiet. But it is our reality. We are what we are because of it. We move forward, but we do not forget the abyss behind us. We believe you, Thrax said, the admission costing the ancient pride of his people a great deal. And we believe that your search for security is not a pretense for aggression. It is a genuine, species-defining imperative. For this reason, the Xylos Collective has abandoned any claim to the Veil of Whispers. It is yours to develop as you see fit. Rostova's expression remained neutral, but Thrax detected a subtle relaxation in the muscles around her eyes. It was the first crack in her perfect, controlled facade. She had come here expecting to negotiate from a position of weakness, armed only with a threat of mutually assured destruction. She had not expected this. But our offer is greater than that, Thrax pressed on, feeling the momentousness of his next words. A simple cessation of conflict is not enough. Your people will simply move on, building new walls, seeing new threats in the shadows beyond. This cycle of fear must be broken. The Xylos Collective formally proposes a full and unconditional alliance with the Terran Confederacy. We will share technology. We will establish joint scientific and cultural exchanges. We will sign a pact of mutual defense, guaranteeing your sovereignty with the full might of the collective. We will be your shield, so that you may finally, perhaps, lower your sword. This time the reaction was unmistakable. Rostova's composure shattered for a brief, fleeting instant. Her eyes widened, a look of profound, unadulterated shock flashing across her face before being ruthlessly suppressed. She was a diplomat, a soldier, a survivor, trained to never show weakness, but Thrax's offer was so far outside the parameters of her expectations that it had bypassed her defenses entirely. Humanity had never been offered a hand of genuine, unconditional friendship. They had met only competitors, threats, or, in the Xylos, what they assumed was a future enemy. An alliance, she stammered, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. High Counselor, with respect, why would you align yourselves with a species you yourself called chaotic and violent? A species whose history repulses you? What could you possibly gain from such a pact? Wisdom, Thrax said simply. We have grown old and complacent in our peace. We have forgotten the value of struggle. We have forgotten the necessity of vigilance. You have never had the luxury of forgetting. Your paranoia, which we once saw as a flaw, is a survival trait we must relearn. Your frantic pace of innovation, born of desperation, could reinvigorate our own stagnant sciences. And your will, he paused. Your terrifying will to survive if aimed no. At an enemy, but at the great, unsolved mysteries of the cosmos. It could usher in a new age for us all. He saw the calculations turning in her mind. She was assessing the offer, searching for the trap, the hidden clause, the angle of exploitation. It was her nature. It was her history, whispering warnings in her ear. There is no deception here, Ambassador, Thrax said gently, sensing her internal conflict. We are offering you the one thing your people have been searching for since they first looked up at a hostile sky, a safe harbor. All we ask in return is that you teach us how you survived the storm. Rostova was silent for a long time. The soft hum of the station filled the void. She looked past Thrax out at the starfield, at the distant swirl of the Milky Way. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with an emotion she could no longer contain. It was not joy or relief. It was a profound, aching weariness, the sound of a soldier being told the war is finally over. On behalf of the Terran Confederacy, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I accept your proposal. We will begin drafting the articles of the alliance immediately. A sense of profound, historical weight settled over the chamber. Two species, one forged in serene peace, the other in endless war, had found common ground. A new path for the galaxy was being charted, one of unity instead of conflict. But as the formal protocols of their new alliance began, with shared data streams and open communications, the first great test of their union arrived far sooner than either of them could have imagined. It came not from a fleet or an ultimatum, but from a quiet, unassuming human analyst, one of the many now tasked with reviewing the collective's vast, ancient sensor logs. An urgent, encrypted message flashed from the human embassy to Thrax's personal comm. It was from Rostova. Her voice was stripped of all diplomacy, all calm. It was sharp, urgent, and filled with an alarm that chilled Thrax to his core. "High Counselor, you need to see this. Our analysts have been reviewing your deep-range sensor data on the Veil of Whispers. Your logs noted it as a region of anomalous, low-level energy fluctuations and gravimetric distortions, which your scientists classified as natural nebular phenomena." "That is correct," Thrax confirmed, a sense of unease growing within him. "The region has been stable for eons." "It has not been stable," Rostova's voice was stark. "It has been decaying, very, very slowly, so slowly that over 1,000 years the change is almost imperceptible, but it's there. Your people living in a state of equilibrium see patterns of stability. My people, we are experts in chaos. We look for the signal in the noise. We are conditioned to find the patterns that precede collapse, and we found one." A new holographic display lit up in Thrax's private chamber. It showed the familiar, beautiful swirl of the Veil Nebula, but overlaid on it were streams of complex human analysis, equations and probability waves that were alien to Xylo's mathematics. A section of the nebula, deep within its core, was highlighted. "The fluctuations are not random," Rostova explained, her voice tight. "They are structured. It's a signal repeating on a timescale so vast your systems dismissed it as background radiation. But more than that, the gravimetric distortions. They're not from stellar remnants. The energy signature is wrong. High Counselor, that nebula is not a natural formation. It's a machine." Thrax stared at the display, his mind struggling to process the information. A machine, the size of a nebula. "It's a cage," Rostova's voice continued, now barely a whisper, a voice of dawning, cosmic horror. "A containment field, and the signal we've finally managed to translate a fragment of it. It's not a message, it's a warning, repeating over and over. The same phrase in a mathematical language so old it predates all known galactic civilizations. It says, 'Do not open, do not listen, it starves, let it starve.'" The room felt suddenly cold. The Veil of Whispers. The name, once a poetic descriptor, now seemed like a literal, terrifying truth. The human outposts, the source of their entire conflict, had been built on the bars of a cosmic prison. "And the worst part," Rostova said, her voice dropping even lower, filled with the dread of a species that understood existential threats better than any other. "The power source for the containment field is failing. The decay rate has been accelerating over the last few hundred years. Based on our projections, it will fail completely within 2 of our standard centuries, perhaps sooner." Thrax stood motionless, gazing at the image of the beautiful, deadly nebula. The petty squabble over resources, the profound revelations about humanity's nature, all of it was just a prelude, a footnote in a much older, much larger story. The real threat had been waiting in the dark the entire time, silent and patient. He looked at the human analysis on the screen, at the frantic, brilliant logic of a species conditioned to expect the worst. His people had gazed at the Veil for millennia and seen only beauty and resources. Humanity had looked at it for a mere fraction of that time and seen a lock on a prison door, slowly coming undone. He finally understood. The galaxy did not need the Xylos' placid wisdom alone. It did not need humanity's frantic, desperate will alone. It needed both. The alliance was not a political convenience. It was a necessity. The long peace was over. A greater war was coming, a war against a foe imprisoned before their respective species had even evolved. Thrax looked at the swirling nebula, the tomb and prison of some forgotten horror. The whispers were getting louder, and he was grateful for the first time that he was now standing beside a species that knew, better than anyone, how to fight the things that came in the dark. The terrifying truth was not just that humanity's strength lay in its will to fight. The terrifying truth was that the universe was about to desperately need it.